Dear students, I welcome you to this lecture on critical evaluation of the political ideas of Lenin, Stalin and Mao Zedong. Some of the important objectives of this lecture are: first, to explore and gain a deeper understanding of communism; second, to provide an introduction to the lives and beliefs of Lenin, Stalin and Mao; third, to conduct a critical evaluation and assessment of their ideas. Throughout this lecture, I will discuss and debate the complexities of communism and the impact that these three influential figures had on the political landscape. By examining their ideologies and actions, we will gain a greater appreciation for the nuances of political theory and the ways in which it shapes our world. Dear students, first let's start with the introduction. Communist ideas of Lenin, Stalin and Mao Zedong have been a topic of great interest and debate for many years, and the ideologies of these three prominent leaders have been particularly influential in shaping the course of history. In this critical evaluation, we will examine the fundamental tenets of their respective communist ideologies and assess their impact on society. Before delving into the perspectives of these three leaders, it is important first to understand the basic tenets of communism. At its core, communism is a political and economic system that advocates for the collective ownership of property and the means of production. This means that the resources and wealth are distributed equally among all members of society, rather than being controlled by a select few. Lenin, Stalin and Mao Zedong each had their own unique interpretation of communism, which led to different outcomes in their respective countries. Lenin, for example, believed in the importance of a vanguard party to lead the revolution and establish a socialist state. Stalin, on the other hand, emphasized the need for rapid industrialization and elimination of any oppositions to the Communist Party. Mao Zedong's version of communism focused on the importance of the peasantry and the need for constant revolution. Despite their differences, all three leaders implemented policies that resulted in significant social and economic changes in their countries. However, the impact of their ideologies on society has been a subject of debate and criticism. Through this analysis, we will explore the complexities of communism and the ways in which it has been interpreted and implemented by these three influential leaders. Let me begin by talking about the communism and its basic tenets. Communism is political and economic doctrine that seeks to replace private property and profit-based economies with public ownership and communal control of major means of production and the natural resources. This form of government is most closely associated with the ideas of Karl Marx, who outlines his vision in the Communist Manifesto. According to Karl Marx, communism aims to eliminate socio-economic class struggles by creating a classless society where everyone shares the benefits of labor and the state controls all property and wealth. Marx believed that capitalism, with its emphasis on profit and private ownership, led to inequality among citizens. His goal was to encourage a system that promoted a classless society, where everyone shared the benefits of labor and the state government controlled all property and wealth. In such a society, no one would strive to rise above others, and people would no longer be motivated by greed. Communism would close the gap between rich and poor, end the exploitation of workers, and free the poor from oppression. While The basic ideas of communism were discussed by Plato and Aristotle in ancient times. Karl Marx developed them into popular doctrine that was later put into practice. Karl Marx's ideal society ensured economic equality and fairness. He believed that private ownership of property promoted greed and blamed capitalism for society's problems. According to Karl Marx, the problem stemmed from the Industrial Revolution, which created conditions that promoted oppression and encouraged the development of a proletariat or working class. In a capitalist system, the economy is fueled by factories owned by a wealthy few. This creates a need for a large workforce to labor for the factory owners. Unfortunately, this environment often leads to exploitation of laborers who must work to survive. Karl Marx recognized this issue and outlined his plan to liberate the proletariat or working class from the burden of labor. His vision of utopia was a society where people worked according to their abilities and shared wealth equally. Marx believed that if the government controlled the economy and individuals relinquished their property to the state, no single group could rise above another. This idea was described in his manifesto, but the practice of communism fell short of ideal. For a significant portion of the 20th century, approximately 1/3 of the world's population lived in communist countries ruled by dictatorial leaders who controlled every aspect of their citizens' lives. These leaders set wages and prices and distributed wealth as they saw fit. Western capitalist nations fought against communism, and eventually most communist countries collapsed. Unfortunately, Marx's utopia was never achieved as it required a global revolution that never came to fruition. Marx's ideas on capitalism and communism have had a significant impact on the world's economic and political systems. While his vision of utopia was never realized, his critiques of capitalism and exploitation of laborers remain relevant today. It is essential to continue to examine and learn from Marx's ideas to create a more equitable and just society. There is also a non-Marxian communism, which I am going to discuss now. Non-Marxian communism refers to forms of communism that do not strictly adhere to the principles and theories put forth by Karl Marx. While Marxism has been the dominant theoretical framework within the communist movement, there have been alternative approaches to communism that diverge from Marx's ideas. Some examples of non-Marxian communism include anarchist communism. Anarchist communism advocates for a stateless and classless society based on common ownership and voluntary cooperation. Unlike Marxist communism, which often envisions a transitional socialist state, anarchist communism rejects the idea of a centralized state altogether. It emphasizes direct democracy, decentralization, and autonomous self-governing communities. Another important non-Marxian communism is the Christian communism. Christian communism combines communist principles with Christian theology and ethics. It emphasizes the principles of sharing, equality, and social justice found in the teachings of Jesus Christ. Christian communists often critique capitalist system for their emphasis on materialism and inequality and promote a vision of communism rooted in Christian values. The third important non-Marxian communism is council communism. Council communism emphasizes the role of workers' councils or Soviets as the primary organs of power in a communist society. It rejects the idea of a vanguard party and advocates for direct workers' control over production and decision-making process. Council communists believe in the self-emancipation of working class and advocate for a decentralized bottom-up approach to communism. Utopian socialism, which is another important non-Marxian communism. Utopian socialists such as Charles Fourier and Robert Owen envisioned ideal societies based on communal living, cooperation, and economic equality. While they may share some common goals with communism, their ideas often lack the class analysis and historical materialism present in the Marxist theory. Utopian socialism focuses on the creation of self-contained, harmonious communities rather than the revolutionary transformation of society as a whole. Ecological or green communism, which is well-known non-Marxian communism. Ecological or green communism combines communist ideals with environmentalism. It emphasizes the need to address ecological crisis and advocates for sustainable living, communal ownership of resources, and the prioritization of ecological balance. This approach sees the struggle for communism as intertwined with the struggle for environmental sustainability. Each of these variants offers alternative perspectives on how a communist society could be organized and how to address the shortcomings or limitations they perceive in Marxist theory and practice. It's important to note that the influence and prominence of these non-Marxian forms of communism have varied across time and in different regions. Besides, non-Marxian communism includes Leninism, Stalinism, and Maoism. These are notable examples that have significantly impacted communist ideology. These ideologies have had a significant impact on the development of communist thought. As we will discuss later in the lecture, each of these ideologies has incorporated and adapted Marxian communism to varying extent. It's worth noting that with the exceptions of People's Republic of China, no other global superpower is currently ruled by a communist party. The Chinese Communist Party has maintained its grip on power since the communists came to power in 1949 in China. However, it is important to recognize that the official Chinese version of communism, Maoism or Mao Zedong thought, differs significantly from Marx's original vision. Despite these variations, communism remains a complex and multifaceted ideology that continues to shape the political discourse around the world. Now let me discuss some of the key elements of communism. First is class struggle. Communism sees society as being divided into opposing classes, namely the bourgeoisie, the capitalist class, and the proletariat, the working class. It emphasizes the historical struggle between these classes with the goal of ultimately abolishing class divisions. The second is common ownership. Communism aims to eliminate private ownership of property, including land, resources, and the means of production. Instead, it advocates for a collective or state ownership where the wealth and resources of society are owned and controlled by the community as a whole. The third key element is central planning. Many communist ideologies propose centralized economic planning, where the state or central authority determines production goals, resource allocation, and distribution of goods and services. This is intended to prioritize societal needs and eliminate the pursuit of individual profit. The another important component of communism is equality and social justice. Central to communism is the pursuit of equality and social justice. It aims to eliminate social disparities, including wealth inequality, gender inequality, and discrimination based on race or other factors. Communism seeks to ensure equal opportunities, rights, and access to resources for all members of a society. Internationalism, another key component of communism. Communism promotes international solidarity and cooperation among workers and oppressed groups. It emphasizes the global nature of class struggle and envisions a world where workers unite across borders to overthrow capitalism and establish communism. Transition to communism, another key component. Communism envisions a transitional phase between capitalism and full communism. This transitional phase, often referred to as socialism, involves establishment of a socialist state that aims to transform society gradually and the economy towards communism. During this phase, the state retains control over the means of production and works towards building the necessary conditions for a classless society. Communism has faced various criticism and challenges. Critics argue that centralized planning can lead to inefficiencies and the lack of individual freedom, while others raise concerns about the concentration of power in the hands of state and the potential for authoritarianism. Additionally, the practical implementation of communism in different countries has yielded mixed results, with some cases resulting in economic difficulties and human rights abuses. Communism is a political and economic doctrine that seeks to create a classless society where everyone shares the benefits of labor and the state controls all property and wealth. While the basic ideas of communism have been discussed for centuries, Marx developed them into a popular doctrine that aimed to eliminate socio-economic class struggles and promote economic equality and fairness. Now let me turn to Lenin, Mao and Stalin and have a critical evaluation of their version of communism. The ideologies of Lenin, Mao Zedong and Stalin have been the subject of much debate and criticism. While their contributions to communism cannot be denied, their methods and policies have been called into question. This critique aims to examine the flaws in their ideologies and the impact they had on their respective countries. Lenin's communism was characterized by his belief in the need for a vanguard party to lead the proletariat in revolution. While this approach was successful overthrowing the Tsarist regime, it led to the establishment of a one-party state that suppressed dissent and opposition. The lack of political freedom and the concentration of power in the hands of Communist Party led to the rise of Stalin and the purges that followed. Mao's communism, on the other hand, emphasized the importance of peasantry in the revolution. While this approach was successful in mobilizing the masses, it led to disastrous policies such as the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. These policies resulted in the death of millions of people and set back China's economic and social development. Stalin's communism was characterized by his emphasis on industrialization and the collectivization of agriculture. While these policies led to rapid industrial growth, they also resulted in the deaths of millions of people due to famine and forced labor. Stalin's purges and the cult of personality that surrounded him further cemented his authoritarian rule and led to the suppression of dissent and opposition. Furthermore, there exist several shared criticisms among these three leaders. Below are some of the significant areas of critique. Firstly, authoritarianism and repression were prevalent under the leadership of all three individuals. Lenin established Cheka, Stalin implemented purges and gulags, and Mao launched campaigns such as Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. These measures resulted in widespread human rights abuses, political repression, and the suppression of dissent in their respective countries. Secondly, Lenin, Stalin, and Mao concentrated power within the ruling party, leading to the establishment of highly centralized political systems. This concentration of power limited political freedoms, hindered democratic processes, and stifled pluralism and diversity of thought. Thirdly, while all the three leaders aimed to transform their respective countries through socialist economic policies, their approach often resulted in significant economic mismanagement and inefficiencies. Lenin's war communism during the Russian Civil War led to economic collapse. Stalin's collectivization and forced industrialization resulted in famines and hardships, and Mao's Great Leap Forward led to widespread famine and economic setbacks in China. Fourthly, the regimes under Lenin, Stalin, and Mao were marked by severe human rights abuses, including mass executions, forced labor, and political persecution. Millions of people lost their lives or faced persecution due to their perceived political opposition or social class. Lastly, intellectual and artistic freedom suffered under the regimes of Lenin, Stalin, and Mao. The suppression of dissent and intellectual freedom was common practice, which further limited the diversity of thought and creativity. The suppression of dissent and intellectual freedom was a common theme under the regimes of Lenin, Stalin, and Mao. Intellectuals and artists were often silenced, leading to a stifling of creativity and a climate of fear. This suppression of critical thinkers and dissenting voices had a profound impact on intellectual and artistic communities, and the effects of this suppression are still felt today. The critics argue that the communist regimes of Lenin, Stalin, and Mao displayed elements of nationalism and expansionism that contradicted the internationalist ideals of Marxism. The Soviet Union's expansion into Eastern Europe and its suppression of national identities, as well as China's territorial claims and involvement in conflicts like the Korean War and Vietnam War, are points of criticism. These actions were seen as a betrayal of principles of Marxism, which called for the abolition of national borders and the establishment of a global community. Moreover, despite the goals of achieving economic equality, the communist regimes under Lenin, Stalin, and Mao resulted in significant disparities. Party elites and the ruling class enjoyed privilege and power, while the general population faced hardships, shortages, and limited access to resources. This economic inequality was a major source of discontent among the people, and it ultimately contributed to the downfall of these regimes. The suppression of dissent and intellectual freedom, the display of nationalism and expansionism, and the failure to achieve economic equality were all major flaws of communist regimes of Lenin, Stalin, and Mao. While these regimes had some positive aspects, such as their focus on education and healthcare, their failures ultimately outweighed their success. Dear students, while concluding this lecture, we can say that the communist ideologies of Lenin, Stalin, and Mao Zedong have left an indelible mark on the course of history. Despite their unique characteristics, all three shared commitment to collective ownership of means of production and the rejection of capitalism. However, the implementation of these ideas often resulted in totalitarianism, repression, economic mismanagement, human rights abuse, suppression of dissent, and intellectual freedom and widespread suffering. Consequently, the communism espoused by these three leaders have been subjected to extensive critical evaluation. The criticism against them highlights the significant shortcomings of their leadership and policies, which have had a lasting impact. It is imperative to acknowledge the negative consequences of their actions and policies. First, Lenin's communism was characterized by a focus on vanguard party, which would lead the proletariat in the revolution against the bourgeoisie. Lenin believed that the proletariat should control the state and that means of production should be owned collectively. While Lenin's ideas were initially successful in the Soviet Union, they ultimately led to a totalitarian regime under Stalin. Stalin's communism was marked by a cult of personality and a brutal suppression of dissent. He centralized power in the hands of the state and implemented a series of 5-year plans to rapidly industrialize the Soviet Union. While Stalin's policies did lead to significant economic growth, they also resulted in the widespread famine and the deaths of millions of people. Finally, Mao Zedong's communism was characterized by a focus on the peasantry and the idea of a people's war. Mao believed that the revolution should be led by peasants rather than urban proletariat. He also emphasized the importance of self-reliance and the rejection of foreign influence. While Mao's policies did lead to significant social and economic changes in China, they also resulted in widespread famine and political repression. The communist ideologies of Lenin, Stalin, and Mao Zedong have had a profound impact on history, but their implementation has resulted in significant human suffering and political repression as well, which has been a source of criticism against them and restricted their influence in most parts of the world. Lastly, it is important to note that while communism has influenced significant historical events and political movements, the actual realization of communism as envisioned by its proponents has not been achieved on a large scale. The ideology continues to be subject of debate, scholarly inquiry, and political discourse, with proponents arguing for its potential to address social inequalities and critics highlighting its challenges and shortcomings. Dear students, with this, I would like to wrap up today's topic. I am sure that it has been a valuable learning experience for you and has sparked your interest in the subject matter. I look forward to our next meeting where we can explore a new and exciting topic. Until then, take care and goodbye.